Your Authentic Self is a podcast designed to guide you towards a deeper, more rewarding life by nurturing your emotional, mental, physical and spiritual well-being. We're thrilled to take you on this journey. Welcome to today's episode.
So welcome to another episode of the Your Authentic Self podcast. Today, myself and Lee will be talking about armouring, masks and personas. Quite a mouthful, but we're going to hopefully talk you through what we mean by these phrases as we go through this episode. So hopefully you'll find this useful. So for me, this is all armouring, masks and personas are all about protection. And if you think about it, when we're children, we're quite vulnerable, aren't we? And so we are very likely to be hurt, not always in horrible ways, in abusive ways, but things that parents say, siblings say, teachers say, they can be hurtful, can't they? And so somehow we need to be able to protect ourselves from the hurt that the world inflicts upon us. So an example of that, I remember being in primary school, and there's a very savage teacher who was my teacher in a primary school class. And if you got anything wrong, she had this massive great eraser and would rub it out. And as she did, her bangles jangled and like everybody knew somebody had got something wrong. And that was like really quite scary. Being 5 or 6, it's quite scary to think I've got it wrong and she's going to tell me off. And so I had to kind of develop some kind of protection against that. So for me, armouring and putting on a mask or developing a persona is all about protecting myself or ourselves from hurt, from vulnerability, from fear, from anything unpleasant, really. Does that kind of make sense?
It makes sense to me. I think I'll just reiterate that. So it is about protection and any insecurities we have in the moment.
Yeah, I think so.
For myself.
Yeah.
I think if I talk about myself, I think from a young age, and this is me being vulnerable and opening myself up a little bit. It's from a young age, I was told you're not attractive.
Right.
Or if someone paid me a compliment, a family member would say that, oh no, he's not, etc.
Right.
So then I would build up a persona as growing up of being attractive,
right.
or
like to pretend you were. You mean,
yeah, pretend I was,
like fake it.
Yeah, fake it really,
Yeah.
and have this confidence within
Right.
myself that I was, but actually inside I wasn't. I was insecure because it was built up from.
Yeah.
But that could come across as arrogant.
Yeah.
Or something. But it wasn't. Once again, we're talking about authentic self. It wasn't
Yeah,
who
yeah.
I really was. It was what was being portrayed just from
Yeah.
that sense of the child insecurity in me still.
So you developed a persona like I'm an attractive, confident guy persona.
Yeah.
But it's not actually how you felt.
It's not how I felt. No,
No.
I was actually insecure in that moment.
Right. Yeah.
And, but that was a mask and a persona that I put on, this
Right.
air of confidence,
Right.
which wasn't who I truly wasn't
Yeah.
authentic, and actually didn't come across that way.
Because in that moment, the authentic you was actually someone who was quite insecure and afraid, maybe vulnerable.
Yeah.
You
Very
weren't the
vulnerable.
confident,
No.
attractive character you were portraying to the world. So it was inauthentic.
It wasn't. Not inside. I wasn't feeling it.
No.
But just projected it out with my persona.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, armouring, if I just come back to armouring, it's a strange word perhaps, but if you think back in the day, knights in castles and stuff wore armour, didn't they? And that was to protect them against the enemy's attack, wasn't it? So they put on the suit of armour, and then inside that they were protected, perhaps a small little gap to look through, but they were totally covered, weren't they, in the metal armour which protected them from the attack. So this phrase armouring is kind of just relating to how we might effectively put on that suit of armour to keep us safe.
Yeah.
And we can actually do that physically as well as kind of metaphorically. So, sometimes can armour themselves by putting on a lot of weight. Because then they're kind of, it's unconscious of course, but then there's this kind of extra layer that kind of keeps them safe. Or the other way, perhaps losing a lot of weight in order to protect themselves. It depends on the individual and the circumstances. But I think that's quite an interesting way to think about it. What armour do I put on that keeps me safe from the outside world?
Yeah.
What suit do I put on in the morning that keeps me safe?
Yeah, and it's like we said, it's all a protection, and a safety, just from that insecurity. Go back about the weight. It's a bit like people that generalising, but people that lift weights and get big muscles, etc.
Yeah, exactly.
And I've met a few people, personal friends, etc. I know end up lifting weights, etc.
Yeah.
Because they felt insecure of how they looked.
Yeah.
So they thought, well, if they look weight, etc., it gives them a bit more confidence
Yeah.
and a bit more attractive, etc. But inside themselves, there was an insecurity.
Absolutely.
Or other people that are not so secure themselves on a physical manner and living in a male world, etc. Think, well, if I look big, it'll keep people away from me.
Yeah,
because they feel insecure about their own self.
So that's the kind of the muscular body is almost like the suit of armour, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
It kind of keeps them safe. I guess people might not want to pick a fight with somebody who looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger. So it's like protection, isn't it?
It's the protection.
Yeah. And of course that's very much a male perspective. I'm generalising, but of course women could be bodybuilders too. But thinking about how it might be for women, maybe using makeup and stuff like that, to kind of hide behind and I'm not criticising the use of makeup, but hiding behind that kind of makeup, rather than just saying, well, this is what I look like, this is the natural me.
Yeah. And I think this is in the modern world and society at the minute, and you go into all the plastic surgery, Botox, lip fillers.
Yes.
I'm not up with the old terminology of it all, but just
you haven't had any yourself.
Not any myself, no. So around that, it's for me that would be a mask and a persona, and it'd be very interesting just to see what's going on behind that mask and persona, or the need to do this work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to criticise anybody who feels that they need to present themselves in a particular way, because usually there is some vulnerability hiding beneath that. But I don't know, for me personally, I'm kind of more attracted to authenticity and vulnerability than I am to masks and kind of fake personas.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, if anybody watches Love Island, do you watch Love Island?
I've seen it in the past.
You've seen it, yeah? Okay.
I haven't seen it for a while.
I've seen it a few times. And the people there are almost like perfect, aren't they?
Yeah.
And to me, it's like, okay, if you want to look like that, it's your business, but what might it be hiding? What's that really about? Why don't the young women just come down with their hair a mess in the morning? Why don't the guys just not preen and shave everything they've got? Do you know what I mean? Why can't they just be authentic? And there's something about the way they present to the world, isn't there? But,
and I think that's what's going on in the world, like you say about reality shows and the Love Islands and other reality shows, everything, or even social media. To the extent these days, everyone is seeing a world that maybe not be truly authentic, and showing their best sides of themselves in how a world is, which is going to breed insecurity of growing up and how you perceive you should be looking as well.
Yes.
So I think that
pressure on.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. So armouring then, if you think of that, so just to kind of capture what we've been saying about that, so it's like a suit of armour that we use to protect ourselves from the world, and might be physical, like putting on a lot of muscle or weight or something like that. And we've touched a little bit there on masks, haven't we? Like how we might put a mask on, and I think we all do that, don't you?
Yeah. I think we all do. And even myself. Even to the sense of, I think we've talked about before. It's even if you get on the bus and you haven't had a good morning, but the bus driver says, How are you today? Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah.
That's a mask.
Yeah. Because
in that moment, you don't want to stand there and open up everything about your day to the bus driver.
Absolutely.
So I think what it's leading to is sometimes having some sort of mask are needed. But I think when the mask or the persona and the armouring comes off, when we're talking about being in an intimate relationship with others and bonding and connecting, that's when we need to look at them and maybe strip them back.
I think so, yeah. I mean, to some extent we need masks to kind of function as a civilised society, don't we?
And get through the day.
Yeah,
sometimes.
Exactly. So, it's not that we don't need them, but I think if they become a permanent fixture, if we were to wear that mask permanently, if you think of like, a mask, literally like a Halloween mask or something, if you were to wear that all day or all week or all month or all year or all of your lifetime, it's going to become very uncomfortable, isn't it? Because it's uncomfortable. It's not a good fit. It doesn't kind of fit right, and it is going to be uncomfortable. And yet that's what we do, isn't it? We don't just wear our mask temporarily while we're on the bus or in the queue at the supermarket. We wear them all the time, and then they become uncomfortable and almost like they become part of us, and yet they're not us. A typical mask that I often think about is the people pleaser.
Right.
You know, where you put that mask on of like, I'm always thinking about others, I'm always doing for others, I always put other people first. In a way, that's a really uncomfortable mask to wear, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and you can go the other way of not people pleasing, go the other way of saying all the time, I'm fine. Yeah, it's right. No, that I don't worry about that. You know, but deep down inside that you are worrying about it.
Absolutely, yeah. So we can understand again that this habit, if you like, of putting on a mask and then perhaps not taking it off, it's about protection, isn't it? You know, at some point in our life there was a vulnerability or a painful moment where the best way we found at that time to get through it was to put the mask on. Yeah. I remember being bullied in school. School wasn't good for me. You're probably getting the gist of it. And I would just pretend I was okay. I would pretend it didn't impact. I would pretend it didn't bother me. Of course it did.
Yeah.
You know, but it's just putting on that mask to get through the bullying, and pretending I wasn't affected by it. But of course I was, really.
Yeah. But and that becomes the difficulty of it, because people, once again, we've mentioned before, but people don't truly know who we are then.
No, exactly.
You know, we've got this mask and persona. They're not seeing the true us. We're painting a reflection of something that we're not. It's not really us.
Yeah, absolutely.
A bit like we were saying about me when I was called ugly when I was younger. So I put a mask and an air of confidence of that I'm not, but that would come across arrogant. But people then would think, oh, he's quite arrogant or full of himself. But actually, I wasn't full of myself. I was actually the opposite of that. But my characters come out that I'm a bit arrogant or full of myself, which is not quite true.
So the mask would have been the arrogance, which people might have judged,
you
know, as being unpleasant or not nice to be around. But actually, that was the mask, and under that arrogant mask, there was vulnerability, wasn't there? There was pain.
Pain. Then the insecurity, and it's just my protection.
So we can put these masks on for all kinds of reasons, but I guess the bottom line of it is it connects to vulnerability, doesn't it? Some kind of pain that leads us to find a way of coping with it, which might be to put the mask on and pretend we're something other than what we are. And
it comes back to what we're coming back to is about being our authentic self. And those masks in armouring and personas are not who we truly are.
And that's difficult, isn't it? Because I'm thinking people who are listening to this might kind of think, I'm doing something wrong by wearing a mask, or building my body or whatever. But I think what we have to do is recognise that as we're speaking about this today, I think I speak for both of us, there's great compassion around it, isn't there? We're not talking about this in a way that's like judgmental or like you're doing something wrong.
No.
This was something that was developed very early on in life to protect you from something very uncomfortable or painful. That's the kind of the way we're approaching this, isn't it? Rather than as a judgment.
It's definitely not a critical thing. It was just to open up and just to explore what it is and how it may have come around.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to kind of point that out, because if we can, kind of communicate to everyone that we're looking at this compassionately, then it might help people watching this to kind of think about themselves more compassionately. Because I guess what we're saying in this is really, in an ideal world, we would take these masks off, wouldn't we? We wouldn't hide inside the suit of armour. We wouldn't have this false persona that we're putting out into the world. Ideally, we would take those things away. But that's really scary, isn't it?
And like I said just now, it's not that sometimes we might have to put a mask on or put a persona on, like if we're getting on that bus or we're getting in a taxi or we're getting into work or something, everything's fine, just getting on with the day, because we need to get on with our day sometimes. But I think it's more the sense for me about when we might have to look at those masks or personas and armouring when it's not serving us, or it's hindering our intimate relationships, and then we're losing connection with self and the other person. Then it's about maybe we need to drop those masks and personas then to reconnect with ourselves and the other person.
You touched on something really important there, don't you? Because we're talking about how these are almost like protective strategies that we develop early in life. So that's great then, we needed them almost to survive, but then when we're adults they don't really serve us in the same way, do they?
No.
So what you're talking about here is, okay, as an adult they don't serve in the same way, do they?
No. And I think that's right, touching on it, it's just questioning ourselves and exploring ourselves actually and asking that question, and actually thinking, well, it served me for a purpose then, but actually, is it serving me now? And if it's not serving you now, then just to take a look at that and explore it more.
Let's explore why it's not serving. You talk about intimate relationships. When you say that, are you referring to just like partnership, like romantic relationships?
No. this is the thing. Some people can conceive intimacy just as just with your wife or your partner,
Yeah.
and in a physical intimacy. But no, intimacy can be verbally.
Yeah.
It can just be how we communicate in talk.
Yeah.
We might be conceived of having an intimate conversation now because
Yeah.
we're just being vulnerable and opening up. So
Yeah.
so it can be with our partners, but I think we can have intimate verbal communication with our family, our children, even our friends.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's my understanding and definition too.
Yeah.
Even just like with friendships or even with neighbours, there can be an intimate connection.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you're talking about something difficult over the garden fence, there can be a connection that's intimate there, can't there?
Well, that's it. As soon as you are connected to your heart or your emotions, and actually you're communicating from that space, that's an intimate conversation, and you can be having that intimate conversation with anybody.
Yes, yeah. So intimacy isn't necessarily about romance or sex. It's about connection.
But it's about connection,
real connection, I guess, authentic connection.
Yeah. And I think we'll get onto this further because we could open up on.
That's another podcast.
That's another podcast. But there's a difference between speaking from our minds, again, mind and our belief systems, because people can hear what we're saying.
Yeah.
But actually, when we're connected to our heart and our emotions, and we speak from that place, people can't just hear us.
Yeah.
They can feel us.
Yes. Yeah.
And in that moment, that's the intimacy.
Yeah. That's a really interesting phrase you bring up there. So I think that's worth capturing again. So what is it? They don't just hear us, they feel us.
They feel us, yeah. So
I love that.
Yeah, so when we're talking from our heart and emotions, they don't just hear us, they feel us. And there's a big difference.
Yeah.
And that breeds connection and bonding and trust.
So what do you mean by like the feel us bit? What have you got an example of how that might work?
Well, all we are is a mass of energy, which could be another podcast, but all we are is a mass of energy, and even our heart can be felt at least 2 meters away and resonates out. There's a lot of research and data on that. But it's just a bit of, so I'll give you an example. Like if I was say to you, I've been really disappointed this week, Mark, and I've been really sad.
Yeah.
Now you're hearing what I'm saying, but you're not actually feeling that.
Oh, I did actually. My heart opened, but anyway, I get your point.
But for me, then if I just slowed that down and connect to myself and say, I've had a really difficult week this week. I'm just really sad and really disappointed.
Yeah.
Well, within that, actually, I could feel that. So you'd be able to feel.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
You can feel the energy there
could.
instead of just speak. So if we just speak from our mind, it's just words.
Yeah.
It's an intellectual conversation.
Yeah.
But actually, if I just really get a sense of what's going on for me, feel into that, and want to communicate from that place, then you're going to feel.
I did. I mean, I'm quite a visual person. I do feel energy quite strongly. So when you said that, what I saw in my mind's eye was almost like a wave coming across to me, and what in that wave I felt it, and I felt my heart open, and I felt sadness. So I think that's what you're meaning. It's like empathy then. So when you say you feel it, it's like there's an empathic connection, to what's being said.
And as I said before, like if my we're talking about heart now, but my heart is open, that energy that is a wave of energy. It's electricity. It's electric. And as I said, there has been research and data that it can be felt up to 2 meters away. So I know when my heart is open, there's a warmth and there's an appreciation, and actually if I'm speaking from that point, you're going to feel that too.
Going to feel it,
and then as I said, that's where the connection and bonding comes from within relationships. Because if I come to you from a shut down space, generally the other person will want to protect themselves and just close themselves down as well.
Of course, I absolutely agree. So these coping strategies, the things we talk about, the armouring, the masks, the false persona, that those coping strategies we develop early on really get in the way of connection as adults, don't they? This strange analogy is coming to me of like, imagine two people both wearing a suit of armour trying to have a relationship. It's like really hard, isn't it? They can't really give each other a hug. They can't talk very easily because they've got the metal thing in front of their face. It's going to be hard to have any kind of intimate connection, isn't it?
And know where each other's coming from.
But then if these two people obviously have been hurt because they're wearing their suits of armour, so at some point they've been hurt, I guess it's really challenging, scary, risky to think about what it might be like to take those suits of armour off and actually connect authentically. That could be quite scary, couldn't it?
It will be scary, especially if there are past experiences, once they have tried to open up, actually it's been shut back down again.
Yeah.
So then it's
Yeah.
It's going to stay there then.
Yeah. So quickly whip it back out the wardrobe and stick it back on again.
That's right.
Yeah. But I don't know if you see this in your work. I mean, I know I do, that so often people will bring issues of relationships to their therapy sessions. And quite often what I get a sense of is that it's things are going wrong because two people are too armoured. They're kind of like trying to meet through their masks or their false personas.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the vulnerable people on both sides, the true them, the vulnerable them, they're getting disappointed, hurt, upset, and then of course it has a massive impact on the relationship.
But unfortunately, they're creating more disappointment and hurt by keeping their masks on.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the risks.
Yeah.
But I as I go back to say before, it's about dropping that armour in and the personas, and actually getting heard and felt, not just from the heard perspective.
That it takes a risk, doesn't it? Because almost like to remedy this, if that's the right word, it's almost like going back to the beginning, isn't it? Taking off the mask or the armouring, and being back with that vulnerable self that we were at the point we put the mask or the armouring on. So it almost needs us to go back to being vulnerable in order to heal, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that's hard.
Yeah, it is hard. But it's what's needed, as we're talking about, as intimate relationships. I'll give you another example. Where you take any, divorce rates now or separations, they say that the research is that 50% of people end up in divorce.
Wow.
And I think that's because how people are communicating.
Yeah.
They're coming from the mind space, they're coming from their armour, and they're coming from their masks, and they're getting just from their point of view of wearing the armour and the mask, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
But what you need to do is drop down, because people would get caught up into, if they have a conversation or something, actually how they get into conversations, well, you're not doing this anymore, well, is that right? Well, you don't do this anymore, etc.
Like blaming and attacking.
It's not what's really going on.
No.
What's really going on, if I can give an example, if we go back to the connection again, is if there's a little bit of discontentment in say, let's pick myself in my relationship and say that me and my partner hasn't communicated for a week, and actually I'm feeling a little bit isolated, a little bit lonely, and disappointed around it, and actually I disconnect from that and go to mind, and I'm going to mind, so I armour myself. So I armour myself because I don't want to feel that pain, so I disconnect from it. But the problem is, when I go to my mind, then what I'm going to do is get caught up in a lot of distorted thoughts and in negativity. And if I approach the conversation from that point of view, they're not really know what's going on for them. All they're getting is the armouring.
Yes, exactly.
And that's what I'm going back to what we said earlier about, they can hear what I'm saying, well, I'm just not happy about this. They're not really what's going on. But while I need to approach the conversation, actually, there's been a little bit of disconnection between us.
Yes.
And I'm just feeling a little bit vulnerable, a little bit lonely, a bit isolated. I'd like us to reconnect again.
Which is a much more
and how do you feel about
open
that?
way, isn't it?
But if you approach the conversation from the mind armouring sense, well, I'm not happy. You don't do this. You're that. The other person is generally going to get defensive and put some armouring on themselves to protect themselves, because it's going to feel like an attack. But if actually you strip that down and just reconnect and drop the armour and drop the mask, actually I'm just vulnerable. And if I'm feeling vulnerable, I'm imagining you are. They're less likely to put on some armour in themselves, and that's when the more intimacy can come in.
Absolutely. I mean, it's human nature, isn't it? If someone perceives that they're being attacked, they're going to be straight into the wardrobe for the suit of armour to protect themselves.
That's right. Yeah.
I like what you say there about how almost like the mind can be used as like a defence system or a forgotten the word, armouring, to protect, because the mind can then analyse it and maybe get the wrong end of the stick, and then say, go and get your suit of armour on, there's a battle ahead, and then you've got two knights in armour jousting, haven't you, as opposed to two vulnerable people in authentic relationship.
And actually the two people then get into the argument, and actually they're not being who they truly are, because underneath it they're just disappointed and lonely, and they just want reconnection.
That's the bottom line, isn't it? Connection. So it's risky, isn't it? Like I'm saying, to risk having this conversation without suits of armour and masks lying around to quickly grab hold of if we need to. But at the same time, it's almost like it's the only way healing can occur, isn't it? It's the only way that authentic relating can occur, by being vulnerable. Because any other way basically relies on suits of armour. Well,
and it's very interesting, because I speak to people, in my work, and And we're talking about vulnerability and being who you truly are in your vulnerable self, of feeling lonely or isolated or disappointed, whatever it is. And then they put their armouring on.
Yeah.
And then they communicate from the armouring.
Yeah.
And then they shut down and they say something that they didn't really mean or didn't really want to say.
Yeah.
And I said, well, how did you feel after that? Well, I felt vulnerable.
Yeah.
So you're going to feel vulnerable anyway.
Absolutely.
So you may well learn to be vulnerable in the first place from what's really going on for you.
And being vulnerable is all right, because people will say that, won't they, as if it's a bad thing. You made me feel vulnerable. It's like, well, vulnerable actually isn't bad.
No.
Is it?
No.
It's actually beautiful. It's actually a way of connecting with people. It's authentic, isn't it? We're all vulnerable.
Yeah. And it's what everybody wants, really.
I think so.
Deep down, they want connection, they want to be bonded, and they want to have trust and a beautiful relationship.
I think so.
But it's all these childhood stuff and experiences, what we've learned in these scenarios to shut down.
To shut it down.
Yeah.
And I find this in my work, I'm sure you do, that for authenticity in relating to occur, we have to go back to being vulnerable. And the risk is that if we're vulnerable, we're going to go back to that point at which we were hurt. I don't know, when we were 5 and the scary teacher was shouting about maths or something. But of course, what we have to realise is that we're not going back to that, because we're not 5 anymore.
No.
We're adult. So of course it's the child that found the coping strategy in the armouring, the mask or the whatever. But actually as an adult, we're not as vulnerable as we were when we were a child.
No.
It is different, isn't it?
It is different. And that's exactly what you're saying. Sometimes it's not the present moment that we're in.
No.
We're transported back.
Yeah.
And it's just recognise that.
Yeah.
And then just dealing with it from the present moment.
Absolutely. Because, if I'm speaking for myself here, but if I were to think about my vulnerability, I could easily go back to being, like a really young child, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old or something. And of course, as a 7 or 8 year old, I didn't have the same options, power, autonomy, abilities that I have as an adult. It's a very different world, isn't it? But I know sometimes if I think about being vulnerable, that young child part of me could be, be careful, do you remember what happened last time? Don't risk it. Because that child part of me may not have any idea that I'm now like in my 50s and it's a very different world. So I think sometimes we have to be very careful that younger part of us that absolutely needed that armouring or that mask doesn't kind of prevent us from taking it off when we're adults.
No.
Because they can easily do that, can't they?
And that's just the thing to start recognising. Hold on a minute, I'm maybe back somewhere. The child in me may be raising here, and then just learn tools and techniques how you can be around that. So I think we've got to do that, haven't we? We've got to go back to the point of vulnerability to heal it, and do that by allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, but knowing that we're not really that vulnerable now. Because if somebody did upset us, we could say something. If that scary teacher came now and started telling me I'm no good at maths, I'd have something to say about it. Right. That 6-year-old me couldn't. It was just a different world, wasn't it? You couldn't speak to the teacher in that way because get even more in trouble. But that gets into the situation where we talk about the freeze response, isn't it? Sometimes when we're in that situation again, the child raising up, and we used to freeze like we would back then. And it's, and the way to learn that is just to explore that, learn it, understand it, but just to recognise it. But then to start, a bit like you're saying, but then to start accepting that's not who I am now. That's not the situation I am now. And then learn different things about how actually can I be with this now when it reoccurs again.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, could keep saying this, it's a thing for another podcast, but I think we have to recognise that we're not just us, but we're kind of made up of all these different parts of us that have had different experiences. Do you know what I mean?
Parts.
It's what?
Many parts.
Many parts, yeah. So, I've definitely got a child part of me that can be really scared of being vulnerable, but I know that my adult self, as I am now, actually isn't scared of being vulnerable.
No.
Not at all.
No.
But I've got to sit with and be with both those parts of me, the adult that isn't scared of being vulnerable and the child that still is. And it's weighing that up, but without the knowledge and the understanding there's these different parts of us, it's hard to manage that in our internal process and systems, isn't it?
So we've talked about that there then. So what about the risks and benefits?
Well, the risk is vulnerability.
Yeah, the risk is vulnerability.
Which is the benefit.
Yeah, which is the benefit. So it's,
in terms of healing,
Yeah.
But we're not necessarily going to see it that way, are we?
No. But that's it. The risks are that we might feel a bit more open and we might feel a bit more exposed. But like we said, but that's the benefit as well, because then we people can see what's really going on for us, who we really are, which is going to bring more connection and bonding with the other person.
But so there is we can imagine this risk, that younger part of us who feels the risk of being in a vulnerable position. But actually, as an adult, are we? I think this is a really interesting thing to consider. Like, I think definitely as an adult, I can be vulnerable, but I don't think that vulnerability has been as big a problem or as painful as it was in the past, because there's different choices. Yeah. I don't know. What do you reckon? Do you think it's?
Well, I think with vulnerability, it's something that you've got to grow and you've got to learn. And if we talk about the vulnerability, if we're talking about vulnerability, we're talking about the emotional emotional vulnerability, and how I explain it to people sometimes, especially if we've disconnected from a very young age. I describe it as our emotional muscle is like a peanut. Yeah. So anytime any vulnerability comes in, be it feel hurt, scared, anxious, what we've learned to do from a very young age is bang. Yeah. We've got to come away from it. Yeah. So we've learned to come away to our mind, but once again, if we go to our mind, then we can get a lot more distorted thoughts, negative thoughts about ourselves and the world. Yeah. But to be able to reconnect to the vulnerability and the emotional muscle, as I call it, then we need to start learning to be to start to sit with it, recognize it, accept it. Yeah. It's part of who we are, and it's just a guide, etc. But the more you do that, your emotional muscle will grow.
It'll grow, You get more used to it.
From that peanut, and it'll grow more, and it'll feel. And the thing to get to is does it feel uncomfortable? Yeah, it's uncomfortable, but is it bearable? Yes. And that's the thing. Yes, it's bearable. Yeah. And this is how you start learning to be with your vulnerability. Yeah.
That's a really good point, isn't it? Is it bearable?
Is it bearable? Yeah. It's uncomfortable, but is it bearable? Yeah. And learn, I can be with it. It's bearable.
And with that kind of strengthening that kind of emotional muscle then and bearing it, actually I think what we do is we develop the capacity to be vulnerable and authentic, and then have very different kinds of relationships.
Yes, definitely.
Because we're not clashing our suits of armour all the time. We're actually able to genuinely connect with someone.
Yeah, and that's where the bonding and connection comes from. And actually the other person that we're talking to as well won't feel that they have to put any armour in. Because once again, I go back to what I was saying, because they're not just hearing us, they're actually feeling us. In our own vulnerability, which allows them to give them a little bit of a green light to feel vulnerable themselves.
Definitely. Yeah, like the ripple effect, isn't it? It kind of goes out, and then if I can be vulnerable, it might encourage somebody else to be vulnerable, who can then encourage somebody else, and so it goes on. We've really got to come away from this idea of being vulnerable is bad. Yeah. Being vulnerable is beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah. Well,
it's powerful.
All we are is vulnerable human beings. Yeah. Every day. Yeah.
Absolutely.
We go out in the world and we risk getting knocked over or risk certain other things. It's just we can't get away from it.
Yeah, absolutely. So risks and benefit. The risk is that I suppose this is a risk that the mind will create rather than an actual risk. But the mind might say things like, "Oh, be careful! You don't want to end up there again," or "Don't let people take advantage of you," or "If you drop down that guard, you know what's going to happen." So that's kind of mind fears and worries about what will happen, isn't it? If we take off the mask or the armouring. Yeah. But the reality is actually it opens up a whole different way of being in the world, doesn't it? Yeah. It's definitely a benefit. Yeah. A more authentic way of being.
Yeah, to yourself and your relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what's more beautiful than actually kind of knowing in any particular moment actually what it is you're feeling, what it is you need, being able to communicate that to someone, and that's true connection, isn't it? Yeah. And I wonder if even in that, 'cause it sounds ideal, doesn't it? But then for some people that true connection could be scary, couldn't it?
Well, it's going to be scary at first, especially if it's an armour in a mask that we've put on for, be it like 10, 20, 30, however long it is. It's going to be scary. And anything's scary. Anything's going to cause a bit of anxiousness. Yeah. But that's all anxiousness is. It's the unknown.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Anything new is the unknown, which is going to create a bit of fear and a bit of anxiousness.
Absolutely. But again, like with practice, then the unknown becomes the known, because we'll start to know what happens when we live life from the vulnerable but authentic perspective, won't we? Like we'll know, for example, that it feels better to us, that we actually enjoy greater connection with not everybody, but with the people that matter. There'll be that more authentic connection. So
and I think we'll open this out more on, as we said before, on another podcast, but any form of growth is going to bring discomfort. Any form of growth, and we've talked about this before, and I've highlighted it before, but it doesn't matter if it's any form of growth for your, let's talk about your mind, your body, or emotionally. And I've explained this before, but like if you want to get more educated and intelligent, or have more abilities, you go to uni, read, go to college. And I know what it's like myself, writing essays, my brain starts hurting, but that's because my brain is wiring up and I'm getting more knowledge and it's growing. But I had to go through that discomfort to get it. We talked about going to the gym and lifting weights, but if we want to grow muscle, what do we need to do? We repetitively lift weight, our muscles can ache and feel uncomfortable. What happens? They grow. It'll also be the same as the emotional vulnerability. When I go back about the emotional muscle like a peanut, the more that we learn to sit with it, recognize it, acknowledge it, be with it, our emotional muscle grows. And that's the only. But to go through that, there's going to be a bit of discomfort at first. But eventually it's going to grow.
I often say to people, there's always choice, because there's a choice in this, isn't there? Either to allow ourselves to be vulnerable and to connect with people and ourselves in a more authentic way, or not. There is a choice in that. But in terms of thinking about it from the perspective of risk, so like if I choose to go down the vulnerable, authentic route, there is a risk in that. But then the risk of not doing it, to me, seems greater, because it means that everything just stays the same as it is. I just relate to myself and others with this cumbersome suit of armour on that feels really uncomfortable. And stops me having a nice connection to someone. So that for me is a bigger risk than risking taking it off and being authentic.
I think it's what you just said there. It reminds me when you said there, if you don't, it just stay the same. Now, like we said before, we're not saying that sometimes to get through a day, be it that you've got to give a speech at work, or you've got to get on the bus, you might need to wear a mask. But if it's interfering with your intimate relationships with your partner or your friends or your children, if you wanted to change and you want it to be different, this is the same as well. If you want things to be different, you're going to have to do things differently.
That's very true.
So that's the way to look at it. Which
definitely.
may be uncomfortable to start with.
It might. Just want to kind of go back to what you said earlier about feeling. Like you said about energy, and I had that image of waves of energy, and I think it also works to me the opposite. So if someone is wearing a suit of armour, or is heavily defended, or wearing a mask, I feel the inauthenticity of that person. And what it does is leaves me feeling unsafe. And I've come to learn by doing loads of self-awareness work that feeling of unsafe is because it's an indicator to me that I can't be 100% sure that you were the genuine article in that moment. Because you might not be, because you might be wearing a suit of armour, or because you've got a mask on, or you're presenting a false persona. So my system kind of warns me of that by giving me this feeling of not quite safe. Does that make sense? I don't know if you have something similar.
Because their behaviour feels indifferent. From how they're acting to what they're saying.
Exactly.
So there's going to be that indifference and that not feeling quite sure or quite safe of what's being said, what's really going on.
I mean, I don't believe that it's true that I'm not safe, but it's that's the feeling I get of something's not right. It doesn't feel safe to totally trust or open up here. And I've really come to learn that is just my system telling me that this person is probably presenting in an inauthentic way in this moment.
And like I said, it doesn't have to be I have to keep myself physically. I might not feel that I have to keep myself safe physically.
It's not physical.
It could just be emotionally or mentally.
Absolutely.
Something isn't quite right here. So then that's when. That could be quite easily for me to put on some armouring, because I need to protect myself right now.
Exactly. So then, we could always have a conversation about that. But I remember some years ago, my car kind of died unexpectedly, and I went to the car sales place, and this guy, the salesman, came out, and he just kind of like, there was something in his energy that really made me feel like there's something not right here. It's not okay. And I was so desperate, I bought the car, and of course it was never out the garage, and I only had it about 6 months, and I had to go back again, well, they'd gone by then, but but in that moment, my system was telling me this is not authentic, this guy is not what he's saying he is. And of course I ignored it at my peril, but we do, don't we? If we ignore those warning signs, we're going to come to realise why we should have listened to them. Yeah. So again, a benefit there then of trusting that, I guess, is that we might avoid costly car bills and things. Yeah. So I suppose what we're really thinking about in all of this is, really, do we have a choice? Do we have a choice to kind of keep the armour on, to keep the masks on, to keep presenting the false persona? Because it comes at a great cost, doesn't it?
Yeah.
To us personally, to our relationships, to our families, to the world, really.
And I think, as I said, I'll reiterate what going back to that, then it's not that at times during the day that we need to put this on, but it's actually, if you start reflect on yourself, actually me having these coping mechanisms of having armours and personas in mass is actually hindering my relationships, then maybe it is time to start to have a look at that and explore that more, and how you can be around it. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's it, 'cause, who really doesn't want to enjoy better connection within their relationships? And actually, if someone is listening to this and saying, actually, I don't want better connection in a relationship, there's a mask, there's a persona, there's a bit of armouring coming up, isn't there? Because as human beings, we are wired for connection. It's just our natural way of being, isn't it, to be connected to other human beings? So if anyone is thinking, no, not for me, that's a great indicator, isn't it? That there's some mask or some armouring on there that might need to be looked at. Yeah. So I think we've kind of wrapped that up quite well. Do you?
Yeah, I think that's...
Any final thoughts for this episode on armouring and masks and persona?
Well, as I said, I know I've said it before, but I'll just go back to it. It's as we went back from the beginning, like you said, like we don't want to criticise anybody for having any sort of armouring or any sort of personas or masks, be it for their physicality or it could be their cars, their houses, the makeup or any work they've had done. It's not about criticising.
No.
And also we know that everyday life is going to bring some masks, be that at work or getting on the bus. But it just goes back. It's just reflect on it. Just explore it within yourself. Actually, is some of my coping mechanisms, some of my armouring, just really hindering my relationships?
Absolutely.
If it is, maybe take a look. It's like you said, because deep down, we really want connection with others.
We do. Yeah,
it is. And to get that, we need to drop the armouring.
I think we do. Yeah, and remember your phrase, how does it serve me?
Yeah, how does it serve me,
Or not.
Is it serve me? And if not, go back to yours, then I have a choice.
Indeed. Yeah. Thanks, Lee. It's a great conversation.
Yeah. Cheers, Mark.
And for anyone who's watching or listening to this, you can follow or subscribe, depending on the platform you're watching us on, and don't miss an episode. So we'll see you on the next one. We appreciate you taking the time to listen to us today. If anything you have heard has resonated with you, you would like to explore more, or have found difficult, you can get in touch with us. Our details are in the show notes below, along with some other useful links.